Just waiting for some people to get on. Thank you to everyone that hit the thumbs up button. I am about to show you a story. I'm going to read it to you, and I want you to do your best to guess when this was written based off of what is said, and you are going to see, without a shadow of a doubt, why I wrote the real estate crash course and how to prepare for what's coming. This shows you so much. And remember, to see the future, we can only see as far into the future as we can see as far back in the past. History completely repeats itself, and these cycles are very easy to see. And there's a trap that was set through a couple of different things, but one of them being the interest rate market and the derivatives market. And it's popping right now. It's been popping. It's a multi-year pop. And this story that I'm about to share with you is going to expose that and really hopefully wake a lot of people up and open their eyes as you hear it. Faith comes by hearing, and then you're going to see it, and you're going to be able to take full advantage of this crash in the housing market. I don't care what anyone on YouTube tells you, even if they're making $100 million a year because they've only bought a home from the dates of 2009 until now, they've never seen a crash. I am one of the only people that can say that I was invested way before, did something, and have the proof of selling my homes in 2005 to get ready for that crash, and then walked away not fully unscathed, learned a lot of great lessons. Here we go. Do your best as I read this story to guess when this story was written. This is out of the New York Times. It's entitled 20 Years Later, Buying a House is Less of a Bite. I'm not going to reveal the date until the end of reading this. Despite a widespread sense that real estate has never been more expensive, families in the vast majority of the country can still buy a house for a smaller share of their income than they could have a generation ago. A sharp fall in mortgage rates since the early 1980s, a decline in mortgage fees, and a rise in incomes have more than made up for the rising home prices in almost every place outside of New York, Washington, Miami, and along the coast in California. These often overlooked changes are major reason that most economists do not expect a broad drop in prices. I can't read the rest of that. It'll give it away. Again, we're guessing when this was written, and I'm going to explain it. But let me stop right there. This story is already setting you up for it's super expensive in Miami, in New York, in Oregon, the coast of California, but there's so many other opportunities. How many of you have seen those stories in the last couple of years, right? Egging you on, trying to get you sucked in, right? Right here it says most economists do not expect a broad drop in prices. Are you hearing that right now? Type 1 if you hear that right now. All the professionals that probably don't even own their own home, let alone a handful of rentals, are telling you don't expect prices to drop. Your real estate agent's telling you that. Your loan broker's telling you that. Don't expect prices to drop. Because they all have a common goal, is to get you to do something so that they make money. Very important to understand. Very dangerous. This is going to be detrimental to so many millions of people in the next year and a half. It says the long-term decline in housing costs also helps explain why the homeownership rate remains near a record of almost 69%, up from 65% a decade ago. Do you think that's a really big jump, 4%? Tell me down below. I don't think it's a very big jump over a decade. Nationwide, a family earning the median income, the exact middle of all incomes, would have to spend 22% of its pre-tax pay this year on mortgage payments to buy the median priced home, according to an analyst by Moody's Economy.com, a research company. Let me stop there. It's probably already given away the date, and you're trying to guess when this article was written to try and cheerlead you, to get you excited. And I'm going to share something about my past and exactly what I was doing while this article was being written. I can share these with you because I've read them back when they were written. And I thought they were propaganda at best, lies at the worst. 22% on its pre-tax pay. Let me ask you this. In your opinion, do you think that it costs much more than 22% today of your pre-tax pay to buy a home? Type 3 if it takes more than 22%. The facts are it does take more, and economists have already talking about it. That's why this time is going to be worse. Let me continue on. The share has increased since 1998 when it hit a low of 17% before house prices began rising sharply in many places. Although the overall level has reached its highest point since 1989, it remains well below the levels of the early 1980s when it topped 30%. The early 80s, 30%. It took 30% of pre-tax pay to buy a home. Remember, give your best guess, how much were mortgage rates in the early 80s? What did they top at? I'll answer that in a second. It's a good deal, a good, fair price. Dale Ruttenberg, a 53-year-old bar manager, said of a tan one-bedroom bungalow with a remodeled kitchen and finished hardwood floors that he is buying for $211,000. After renting in Portland for most of last decade, within a couple hours of being here, it was like I'm home. Or I'm going to say it's all I can afford. In high-profile places like New York City and Los Angeles, home to many of the people who study and write about real estate, families buying their first home often spend much more than half of their income on mortgage payments, far more than they once did. But the places that have become less affordable over the last generation account for only a quarter of the country's population. Elsewhere, families tend to spend far less on housing. In Dallas, the share of income needed to buy a typical house has fallen to 13% this year from 14% in 1995 and 31% in 1980. In Tampa, it has dropped to 21% from 26% in 1980. This is staggering, these numbers, because I know what the numbers are right now. Again, everyone that just jumped on, you're trying to guess what year this story was written in the New York Times. Even in New England, where the soaring prices of last decades have frustrated many young families, house values have still not reached the heights of the early 1980s when calculated as a share of income. Over 20 years, affordability has definitely improved because interest rates are much lower, said Kenneth T. Rosen, chairman of the Fisher Center for Real Estate and Urban Economic Research at the University of California, Berkeley. Houses have also grown bigger during that time, he says, so people are getting more for their money. Here in Portland, a smaller version of the big real estate boom has been in full swing until just the last few months. There's a hint right there. Just until the last few months, there was a boom until just the last few months. House prices have jumped since 2000. Hundreds of new real estate agents have gotten their licenses. An old factory along the waterfront, once famous for making bright red hot dogs, is set to be replaced with condominiums. That's happening too. With many suburban houses now selling for $300,000 and up, young families have a much harder time buying their first home than they did a few years ago. Still, housing has been less expensive this year as a share of local incomes than that at any point during the 1980s. I believe we're already past the 1980s. The amount of the pre-tax income for the average family, of how much that is in their mortgage. We have surpassed the 90s and the 80s. Beyond cost, many families who simply could not have bought a house 10 or 20 years ago find themselves able to do so thanks to changes in the way banks lend money. Like what they're doing right now. You don't need 3% for a conventional loan. You just give us 1%. Same exact thing that's happening. The most money that Tim Gilbert has ever had in his possession was $15,000. He said in a form of a check for a job he had done as a carpenter, but he and his wife, Marjorie, were still able to buy a 1936 Cape Cod style house this year for $176,000 in Portland, for about 45 minutes from Portland. They took out 2 mortgages rather than making a down payment, and they used Mr. Gilbert's $5,000 or so in pre-tax monthly income to cover the $1,600 mortgage. This is such valuable information for you to look back into the past. Still, are you guys guessing what year this was in? And try and nail the month too. It was a very key month. It's almost anything. If almost anything had been different, if interest rates had been higher, or if the bank had required a down payment, the Gilberts would still be living in an apartment underneath a loud landlord. Moody's economy.com calculations took into account the decline in the down payment size in recent years. But even though these lower down payments, doesn't it sound like today again? Why does Zillow, why does LendingTree and all these massive lenders have to drop their requirements for a down payment from 3% to 1%? Why do they have to do that? Just like they did back then. It says, but even though these lower down payments mean home buyers are taking out loans equal to a larger share of the house's price than in the past, monthly payments have remained reasonable in much of the country. We don't even have that anymore because, like the last crash, and I'm giving it away, the country is reeling in high everything prices, not just the price of the home, not just the interest rate, not just the tax, not just the home insurance, but now the food, the electricity. You want to say this time it's worse? Do you agree this time is worse? Type 10. Do you think it's going to get really bad? Type 11. Why? Because 11's louder. I'm going to disclose now the month and the year that this was written. The New York Times wrote this story about home ownership and how it's still it's so much cheaper in the past. Just buy, just buy, just buy. Even though you're having to pay more today than you were having to pay yesterday, don't worry about it, just buy. The Economist said in this story that they don't believe there's going to be a downturn. Well, guess when this story was written? It was written in December 29th of 2005. The Economic Ninja was selling homes aggressively then, marking down homes, selling, running for the hills, warning everybody that a housing crisis was imminent. And I was told by everyone, you're not an authority, you're not a professional, you're not an economist. You don't know what you're talking about. It says right here, again, going back to this phrase, these often overlooked changes are a major reason that most economists do not expect a broad drop in prices in 2006. And they were 100% wrong. If your agent's telling you the prices aren't going to drop, that this time's different, they're wrong. If your lender's saying you better lock in now because if you can't, you're never going to get a house, they're wrong. Guess what? The sun always comes up tomorrow. The sun always rises. There's always a peak. There's always a trough. The question is, who are you listening to? Are you listening to a bunch of fools like Jim Cramer online just trying to sell you stocks? Are you listening to real estate experts that have never bought a house before the year 2009? They have never known anything outside of the realm of ultra low free money. You just watch the world shut down. You watch interest rates go negative in some parts of the world. This has never happened before, which means you've never seen a crash like this before. And this is why I wrote that course, How to Prepare, the Easy Things, because there is a plan to take your home. And the masses are running to the so-called experts that back in 2006 and today is no different. We don't see a broad drop in prices. Well, get ready. There's a reason why Zillow and the largest lenders in the country are giving you a deal on giving you a break because no one can afford a house. And when no one can afford a house, the fall is right over the horizon, right around the corner. Get ready for it. I'm going to throw some more 80% off links down below. If the course isn't $199 from the links, that means they're gone. But people need to get this information inside of them and understand so that they can buy and sell with conviction and then get excited to make more money than they've ever made. It's not time for the banks to make money. It's time for you to make money. The Real Estate Ninja, which is another channel, it's not Economic Ninja, is out.